Welcome to the New York Business Leaders Podcast, presented by the Coyle Group. We interview the most interesting and influential business leaders in New York and hear their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned while building their businesses and personal brands. New episodes drop weekly, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates in your favorite stream. Without further delay, here's your host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast, Gordon Coyle.
Welcome back to the show. Today's conversation is with Lucas Root, who is a speaker, author, and coach and consultant focusing on productivity habits, brain state management, and helping decision makers with execution. Prior to this consulting practice, Lucas worked on Wall Street for 17 years and took many of the lessons learned there to form his consulting and coaching practice. You're going to hear how he is engaging people to be productive while working at home, how to build good habits, how to build and manage relationships through connection, and a lot more. I was super charged up to have this discussion since I've been sharing my productivity tools and hacks on LinkedIn and YouTube recently. All great content and advice. To find out more about Lucas, you can go to lucasroot.com, which is LUCASROOT.com, or check him out on Instagram and LinkedIn. His account name is the same, at Luke Root, LUCROOT. Finally, if you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on this podcast, contact me, Gordon Coyle, at gbcoyle@thecoylegroup.com, and let's chat. Now, on to the show. Welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. I'm Gordon Coyle, your host. Today, I've got Lucas Root with me. We're going to talk about productivity, mind state management, some great stuff I love talking about. So I'm really excited about this conversation. Lucas, welcome. Take a couple minutes, introduce yourself, and tell us what you do.
Thank you for having me, Gordon. So I started out my career on Wall Street. I was in mergers and acquisitions. I was actually in the project world on the back end of a merger. I was the guy who put together the two companies that were going to be merged, make it all work. Mm-hmm. But believe it or not, there's actually a career track for that. What's cool about that is that I got to spend a lot of time with really crazy smart, really successful business leaders who had built a business that was either big enough and successful enough to be acquiring somebody or big enough and successful enough to be acquired, right? You don't acquire a company that's not successful. You acquire them because they're successful. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sitting in these rooms with these business leaders, figuring out how to optimize processes that have sort of grown organically over time and again, are successful. I did that for 17 years. And then I decided it was time to sort of hang up my shingle and go out and do my own consulting thing. I've been consulting now for the last 7 years. And for the most part, it's been amazing. I now do three things. I'm a consultant. I work with brands who don't execute. And we can talk about what that means in a second. I also own 3 retail flooring stores. They seem like two very divergent businesses, I imagine. And I do some coaching, some business coaching for businesses that feel invisible.
Interesting. I would say divergent interests in businesses. Yeah. But I think that one of the things that you hit on is optimizing processes. So if you know how to do that as an entrepreneur, you can do that as a consultant for third parties. You can do that as a coach for an individual, or you can do that as a business leader running a business. So I don't see them as really divergent from a very high level. So I'm glad you
get it.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of what I talk about with my clients and prospects and even my networking friends is about systems and processes. And I think when you break that down to the granular level, we all work best when we have a system or a process. And a lot of that is driven by habits. I don't know if you agree with that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're nothing without our habits. Our habits make us. They say you are the combined income of your 5 closest friends, or your income is the average of your 5 closest friends. which is kind of true, but I would actually go one step further, that your income is actually the average of your 5 best habits, and you pick up and you fine tune and you hone your habits with the people that you spend time with. So that could be your closest friends, that could be your colleagues and coworkers, that could be your family, it could be your mastermind group.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that habits help eliminate a lot of rethinking that you have to do every day if you've got good habits.
Yeah.
God forbid you have really terrible habits.
Then Steve Jobs is one of my favorite examples. People talk about his wardrobe a lot.
Yeah.
He once famously said, I wear the same thing every day because I don't want to spend a single instant of energy choosing what to wear. Now, for those of you who are listening, and pardon my language, it's total bullshit. It is absolutely not true. Steve was one of the most successful people in the world. He could absolutely have had a stylist that spent time figuring out what he was going to wear for him every single day. So his wardrobe choices were not actually about saving thought time, because he could have outsourced that, and he was a master at outsourcing. His wardrobe choices were about creating the history of habit in the people that spend time with him, his employees, his team, his family, so that they recognize that making choices that are easily repeatable is actually strongly valuable. His wardrobe choices were a statement, just like any other wardrobe choice is a statement.
Interesting perspective. I hadn't heard that, but it makes a lot of sense because it kind of dopes out what he stood for, what he talked about, what his productivity measures were, how he encouraged people to behave. So very interesting. So one of the things that you've been really focusing on is helping folks in their work from home strategies and being productive. Since the beginning of the pandemic, I've worked from my office because it's only 10 minutes from my home. The rest of my team works from home. I just like the work environment I have. So I've built my own habits. But why don't we talk about productivity, work from home? I can just imagine if I was home, I'd be out in the garden, cleaning the pool, doing whatever, not really being productive. So tell us what you've been seeing since the pandemic and working from home type stuff.
So the Pokemon company called me up. They're one of my clients. They called me up in April of 2020. So the pandemic had hit. It was starting to look like something that was going to be sticking around for a little while, at least a couple of months. They called me up and they said, "Hey, you've been working from home for us for years. We know you're not on Wall Street anymore. You left because you're consulting, right? So you probably know a thing or two about this stuff. Would you put together a presentation for us so that our employees have a guideline that will lead them forward at least a little bit? Something to go with." Loved it. Hell yeah. Sign me up. As a client, they're the client you don't say no to.
Okay.
And so I spent about a week trying to sort of figure out what are the habits that I use? How do I manage my time? Like, I hadn't done it before. This is 2 years ago now. I hadn't done it before. So I spent about a week trying to figure it out. I put together an hour-long presentation. It actually came out great. I had no reason to expect it would, but it did. It came out great. They loved it. They actually told their friends, "Call this guy. He's not an idiot." Which is a good place to start. Let's start there. Yeah. Hopefully I can build.
The bar's not too high.
Yeah. He's not an idiot. We like this. And so I started getting calls from people who knew me through Pokemon saying, "Can you present the work from home stuff for us?" Yeah. Sign me up. Write me a small check. They already pay me. You don't. And so I started putting this together over time. Here's what's cool about Zoom. You might actually have noticed this. Here's what's cool about Zoom. You can do a presentation, and then when you're done, you can go back and rewatch the presentation, and you can see the audience's reaction when you say stuff. So I would present stuff over here, and people would start pulling out their phone. I'm like, oh, okay. So that little thing, either I'm not doing a good job presenting it if it's important, or maybe it's really not that important. And people's reactions were helping me fine tune this.
Interesting.
Awesome. I loved it. And this other thing I would talk about, and people would put down their phone and start leaning in and paying attention, or I'd see them pull out a notepad and start taking notes. It's funny that people take notes on paper, but when they're distracted, they actually pull out their phone. I know that they have both at their desk, but they take notes on paper and they use their phone as a distraction tool. Another thing I learned while I was watching the replays.
Interesting.
So it turns out that there are a couple of really, really fine-tuned ideas that came out of me doing this for a year and watching the replays and learning from the way people are reacting. And it turns out that they're actually really, really simple ideas. Number one, your habits make you. Like, your habits actually make you. You are the person you are because of your habits, not because of the choices you make, but only in that the choices that you make may or may not create habits for you. And it's the habits that make the person that you are. Boom, right? Drop the mic. Except mine's on a stand. I can't really drop it. Number one. Number two, time management is not what people think it is. And in fact, it's not even what I thought it was when I first started giving these presentations. I would talk about the Pomodoro technique, and I still do. I would talk about different things to do with your time management. It turns out that time management is not what people think it is. And number three, your schedule. This is one people write down. Your schedule is not a tool for doing the things that you have to do. It's a tool for getting to the things that you want to do.
Interesting.
Those three really simple ideas are the core of being successful at being productive from home.
So after you would have this coaching session with employees, they write down their notes like I've been doing.
Right? You write down with paper and pen. You're distracted on your cell phone.
So if you see me during the interview going
thing.
like this, you're in trouble.
I know I'm in trouble for sure.
If so, the conversation is over, people go back to work. How do you get them to reinforce the good habits and stop doing the bad habits like we just talked about?
So there's a couple of different things that have to be done in order for any of this to work. Some combination of personal thought change and organizational change. Organizational change meaning you're not productive if you're sitting in a meeting with 6 or 7 other people that's about a very specific finite topic, and it's not your topic. So even if you're there, you're already not productive. You're going to spend that half an hour or that hour listening to something that's not that important to you. That really, truly, I hate to say this for people who are listening and don't see it that way, that is wasted time. And let's say you have 7 people in an hour-long meeting and you really only needed 2 people there. What you've just done is you have expended 5 man-hours of time, which is almost a full day. You have expended 5 man-hours of time that didn't need to be expended. And people do this for a reason. If they're not in the room, decisions get made about them or for them and not including them. And this is true. So the organizational change that needs to happen is stop making decisions about or for people that aren't in meetings. And as soon as you do that, now you can stop inviting 7 people to a meeting where it only needs to be 2. Amazing how much difference that makes when people aren't worrying about decisions that are going to be made about or for them. And they get to be focused on their work. Number 2, you have to hit somebody with something that's really big, some statement that really impacts them, like your schedule is a tool for getting to the things you want to do, not getting to the things that you have to do. And the more that people really let that settle in, the more willing they are to use their schedule as a tool instead of have the schedule drive them like a boss standing over their shoulder. Right? Does that make sense?
Yep. So kind of going back to the question though, how do you reinforce that for people once your seminar, webinar, conversation is done? Is that the employer's job to help do that and drive those habits?
Yes, it sort of depends on my engagement. I often recommend that my engagement be longer than an hour.
Okay. Yeah.
But a lot of people don't necessarily see the value of having somebody like me come in once a week for a month or once a week for 3 months. because they don't necessarily believe that changing habits is A, that hard, and B, that valuable.
They don't connect the dots.
They don't connect the dots. So if they don't keep me involved, then I'm not part of the picture. And the best I can do is recommend that you get on my mailing list, and I'll remind you there.
Okay.
And then after that, yes, it's up to the employer and the employee. So you yourself have to decide you want to change your habits. And hopefully I gave you the right steps and impacted you enough so that you're willing to go down that route.
Got it. So I would say that it would seem to me that if an employer said, this is important, we're going to hire Lucas to come in, like you said, once a week. It depends on the expert. Some people say you have to do something for 16 days. Other people say it's 3 weeks. For me, it's like 3 months
Yeah.
to embed a habit. But I think that repetition is what's important. And I think that's where most entrepreneurs, business people, employees, they get lost because they let the existing systems, which may be imperfect, take over their life and kind of ruin their productivity. In fact, we were talking earlier before the conversation really started for this podcast that I did a video on putting your outlook on pause, working offline for a couple of hours every day.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are very resistant to it. They feel like they're going to miss out the FOMO, all of that sort of stuff. But if you do it and you try it and you're consistent with it, which I try to do, I find that I'm very productive in those time frames. But every once in a while, you have to get kicked in the head to remind yourself these are important things.
Yep. So, as I mentioned, among the businesses I own are 3 retail flooring stores. And last year, I had a customer call in, and I happened to be available. I answered the phone. We talked about some stuff. He ended up buying from me. He said, as he was leaving, I always ask for feedback. As he was leaving, he said, the reason I bought from you and not somebody else is because you answered the phone when you called. That is a really powerful, positive feedback mechanism for answering the phone when people call.
Mm-hmm.
Despite that, that's the only time it has ever happened to me that somebody has said, you got my business because you answered the phone when I called. Ever. I've been consulting for 7 years. I've never had a consulting client say, I've never had a potential client that I lost say, you lost me because you didn't answer the phone when I called. I've never had somebody say, you won me because you did answer the phone when I called, except for that one time. So despite how powerful that positive feedback is, I totally get it. Like I get that people want to be glued to their inbox because business is coming in. But let me tell you something. Most of us are not EMTs. I'm not. I'm in flooring. I'm in consulting. Nothing in my business is truly an emergency. I had a payroll hiccup last week. Honest to God, truly, last week I had a payroll hiccup. That's as close to an emergency as exists. And even that could wait 3 hours for me to be finished with the things that were important and already scheduled for me to get around to dealing with that payroll thing. 3 hours does not break the world. The business is waiting. It'll still be there. The person who called in, they were going to call 4 or 5 other people anyway, even if you answered the phone and provided the most amazing customer service experience ever. They were going to call 4 or 5 other people anyway. Now they're done with those calls when I call them back and say, hey, you called, you left a message. I'm here. How can I help you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that kind of leads me into the next conversation, which is about systems and processes and something that you call brain state management. Maybe you can, I love that phrase. Maybe you can tell us what that means and how it fits into the whole systems thing.
Yes. So one of the people that I partner with when I'm coaching is a guy named Dr. Chris Lee. You can go look him up or not. He's a neuroscientist. I love talking to him. I love my partnership with him. He and I spend a lot of time talking about the actual physiological brain states and the names for them. And what's cool about the reason that I do this with him is that brain states are something that we can actually control. We can control whether or not we're zoned out in fantasy land. mean, we can actually choose to zone out and go into fantasy land, or we can control whether or not we're in super detailed, focused admin mode where we're answering all the emails, and we finish more emails in 20 minutes than we ever thought was possible. Or if we're in creative mode, or if we're in spend time with our family mode. And if you think about each of those things and the way that you exist when you're in that space, in that time, in that brain state, you'll notice that the way that your brain feels to you is different each time. And as you get good at understanding that feeling, you can also switch between them because you know what you want to feel like while you're engaging in those activities. And that's, to me, what brain state management is. It's putting together a group of habits, because habits make the man, putting together a group of habits that make it easy for me to switch between the brain states that I want to be in so that I can be productive in the activity that matters at the time. That could be productive at sleeping. That could be productive at spending cute time with my wife. That could be productive at creative work for my clients. That could be productive at answering emails and phone calls.
So would you consider that to be similar to what other people call flow state?
Sort of. Flow state is a brain state, but it's not all brain states.
Okay. Do you want to give us a little bit of what flow state really means?
Yeah. So in order to be in flow state, your brain has to utilize a couple of different technical states. And your audience probably doesn't care that much about them. So instead, I'm going to talk about what it feels like and how to get there. What it feels like is, it feels like time is suspended. Time goes away. And the thing that you're working on becomes 100% of your focus, not 95%, not 98%, right? Where there's still these other little niggling ideas that are sitting on the side. And you could have been more focused and you could have been more productive because of these other little things that have some small amount of your attention. No, instead, in flow state, it is 100% of your focus. You're not aware of time. You don't know that you needed to go to the bathroom. You're not even really aware that you're becoming dehydrated. Flow state's amazing. There are some really obvious places where people enter into flow state. Hopefully this isn't too out there for people, but as you approach an orgasm, every single person is by definition in flow state as they approach the orgasm. Time disappears. Any thoughts, anything that could distract you goes away. That is 100% of your focus. Now, it also feels great, and most people focus on the fact that it feels great, but remember the way your brain felt in that moment, and you'll start to notice that that shows up occasionally in other places. When you're driving, a lot of people go into flow state when they're driving. It's a great example. You're not zoomed out. You're not zoned out. You're actually zoned in. So time sort of disappears. You're not noticing the minutes that are passing by. You're not really paying attention to that car or that car, but you actually know everything that's going around in really quite extraordinary detail. That's what flow state is. And it feels the same way when you're in flow state answering emails, or when you're in flow state writing content or doing creative work, maybe building a strategy for one of your clients.
So you use the word, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, you use the word feeling or feel several times in that. And I can't help but think that there's a lot of people that may be watching or listening to this and say, I don't feel any of that. I don't feel my brain working or experiencing calmness or orgasmicness or whatever. And I understand that, because work in the traditional sense, without really a deep perception of what you're doing, can kind of destroy all that feeling. It's such a mess of, your phone's ringing, your cell phone's ringing, you're getting text messages, Teams is pinging, emails are coming in. So you've got this massive amount of distraction, and maybe all kind of tie it together. Flow state, brain state is really about focus and really understanding how your brain works. And for me, I'll just interject my own personal experiences, is that when my brain feels, use that phrase, calm and productive, I feel great. It's those parts of the day that I've got just too many things going on that I can't relax, I can't focus, I can't really be productive because I'm so distracted.
100% agree.
Okay.
And this is the reason why I keep talking about the feeling. I mean, most of us don't realize, but we actually live our life from the perspective of habits and feelings. We think that we're rational beings. We think that we plan. We think that we're focused on executing, right? But for the most part, that's actually not true. I hope I'm not terribly bursting any bubbles here. Probably a little bit though. For the most part, we actually act from emotion well over 90% of the time. And so even for those of us who think of ourselves as executors, somebody who comes to work and executes, right? And professionally, that's exactly what I am. We still have to refocus on feeling in order for us to be able to be capable of the thing that we want, productivity in the moment, moving into flow state. So focus on the way that your brain felt during an orgasm, the way that your brain felt while you were zoned in driving a car, right? That's that feeling that you want to be able to key into to move towards when you want to be focused in the same way, when you're writing content, when you're doing a strategy, when you're answering emails. That flow state, it's a feeling that happens inside your head. And to be successful, you have to understand the feeling. You have to want it. You have to know what are the conditions that make it possible or impossible. And you actually, Gordon, you hit the nail so heavily, right, smack dab right on the head perfectly, probably because you were just talking about it on your video. Being distracted is the number one reason why you won't be able to get into flow state.
So to pick up on that, distraction won't get you into flow state, but distraction won't get you to be productive either.
That's right.
It destroys productivity.
It does.
It destroys creativity.
It does.
So you're sitting at your desk, whether you're working from home or you're in a company office, and bing, 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 all these things are going off. You're totally distracted. How do you pull yourself back into center and get yourself where you need to be so you have that happy mental state, whether we call it flow state or brain state or whatever you call it? How do you do that?
First things first. You can't stop thinking about your mental list. There's nothing you can do to stop thinking about your mental list, but there is something that you can do to empty it. Now, our brains work in very much the same way as a computer. You can drag that mental list and dump it into the trash can. However, also like a computer, we have a subroutine that says, was that list taken care of? And if it wasn't, it's going to undelete. Wait, what? Undelete? Yeah, 100%. You can be like, I'm done with it. I don't care about any of that crap. Get it off my list. And your brain's going to be like, all right, it's off your list. And then 10 seconds later, it's like, did you actually do something about that stuff? And if the answer is no, it's back onto the list. But you can do something about the things on your mental list without actually completing those tasks. And that's why this thing is so powerful. Remember, I said people take notes with paper and they're distracted with their computer. Don't take notes of your mental list on your computer. I don't know why. Me personally, I'm going to admit it out loud. I don't know why. Writing things down, pen on paper, actually works. Writing it down on your computer doesn't. So write down your mental list, pen on paper. And now 10 seconds later, when you've dumped that list and your brain says, did you actually do something with that list? The answer is actually yes, and it can stay deleted. And now your mental list is empty. And now all of a sudden your brain is free of the distraction of that mental list for a little while. You're going to start adding things back in again. But for a little while, that distraction's gone. And that is the number one ingredient to being able to move into flow state, being able to dump your mental list. Number two, you have to free yourself of whatever was the feeling of your brain state before this moment. And there are some really cool tricks that you can use to free yourself from that previous state, just the moment before, a second ago, 2 seconds ago, 30 seconds ago. We experience feeling not just in our head. We experience feeling in our entire body. Have you ever noticed that you get into a fight? We all get into fights. We can admit it. You get into a fight, and then the next morning you wake up and your shoulders are tight. We feel the fight in our whole body. It's not just in our brains. It's not just in our communication. It's not just in our voice box. We feel that fight in our entire body. And we experience the action reaction in our body that happens as a result of that. It's just as true when you're fighting with your spouse or your kids, that's a stressful event as if you're running away from a dog that wants to bite you. They're different kinds of stress, but it's just as stressful, and your body doesn't really know the difference. And so it had to prepare to defend itself. It had to prepare to reduce blood flow to the spot that you were going to get bit. It had to prepare to be able to help you survive in a very similar way. The corollary to that, the back end of that, is in order to release yourself from feeling your emotions in your body, all you have to do is move your body. It's very cool, very simple. Now, you could go do an hour of yoga, and that probably would free you up from the stress that you've been carrying around for a while, but there are much simpler, faster ways to do it. Have you ever gone out on a dance floor and done some dancing and still been pissed off?
Probably not.
Probably not. Dancing is a magic wand. I mean, really, it is a magic wand. When you dance, it waves the magic wand and frees you up from whatever that crap that you were carrying after you've dumped your mental list, of course, that you were carrying seconds ago. So if you want to be able to get into flow state, you need to cut the brain state that you were in before, stressed, distracted. You're feeling that in your whole body. Get up and dance.
Even if the dance, like I do, is like Elaine Bennis.
Yes. Actually, especially, truly, no joke, especially if it's an Elaine Bennis dance. Okay. If you can laugh at yourself while you're doing it, it's even more effective.
And that's usually what I do when I'm dancing, is laughing at myself.
Yep. it is even more effective.
It is not pretty.
Maybe not pretty, but effective.
Yeah, so it's not only dancing, but I would say it's probably any physical activity that gets your mind off of the minutia and into a better, feeling of just physicality.
Yep. I recommend one of two, dancing or shadow boxing.
Okay.
Especially with sound effects. If you're going to shadow box, make onomatopoeia. Pow, boom, bang, crack, smash. Yep. It's not a joke. If you're laughing at yourself, it's working.
That's cool. So dump the mental list, free yourself from the previous state you were in, and go dancing. Or
that's right.
Shadow boxing. Okay.
Or shadow boxing.
Cool.
Now you're in a neutral state. And so when I like to think about sort of the brain states that we're in, like it's a rut. Not a bad kind of rut, but it's a rut, and you've got your wagon wheels in that rut, and it takes work to get out of that rut. Well, that's the work we just talked about. Write down your list, do a little dance, do some shadow boxing. Now you've gotten out of that rut, and now you're in a free state to choose, right? You get to choose what the new rut that you're going to be in is going to be. It could be you want to go right back into that stress distracted state if you want. I don't recommend that choice. I recommend a different choice, but it's up to you. You get to do what you want. If you're in that free state, if you're in the moment of choice, that's when your habit will save you and move you towards productivity. Don't, under any circumstances, pick up your phone. Don't pick up social media. Don't pick up anything that is a distraction tool. Instead, make the choice to start moving towards productivity. Now, I'm going to make a third step recommendation here. And this one's a little bit weird. It's a little bit woo. We work very much like our computers. We have base programming, and our base programming likes to accept inputs. Now, you could think of those inputs like a spell, or you could think of them as a program. When you're in that open space, in that neutral ground, in that brain state where you get to choose what your rut is going forward, you can enter in a program or a spell right then in that moment and say, for the next period of time, and our brains, I mean, look, we know that time does not exist, but our brains actually experience the world from the perspective of time does exist, even if they don't, our brain doesn't know what seconds or minutes are. But we experience the world that way. And so that language is base programming language for us. So what you say is, for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be focused on being super creative on this thing, on writing content, on writing a strategy, on answering the most important email in my entire life, on putting out this proposal. For the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be super focused and productive on being creative for this thing. And as long as you've written down your list and done a little bit of dancing so that you're in that neutral state, you're free to be programmed and move into that focus, your brain will take that input and say, okay, I can work with this. And it'll start running the program. It's very cool. It'll start running the program. It'll let you cast the spell, however you want to talk to yourself about it. And for the next 30 minutes or the next 60 minutes, you actually will be focused and productive and capable of just executing on that one thing. And that is how you move into flow.
Got it. So let me ask you two questions. Do you believe that there is a optimal number of minutes in which someone can produce the biggest bang for their buck in terms of productivity? You mentioned the Pomodoro method earlier. So why don't we go with that one first?
So we start to have a productivity cost. I call it, me personally, I call it a productivity debt after a very specific amount of time. The number is 33 minutes plus or minus 7 being the standard deviation. Now, I'm about to give you something that's going to really hit that number close. There's a reason why TED Talks are maximum 18 minutes long. It's because 2 standard deviations away from 33 minutes, which the bell curve, 2 standard deviations means you're catching well over 90% of people. 2 standard deviations away from 33 minutes is 18. 33 minutes minus 7 twice is actually 19, but it's 18 minutes. And so they made the TED Talk 18 minutes because they knew that more than 90% of people who click listen are going to be able to stay focused for that amount of time, but not longer. So 33 minutes plus or minus 7. Most people don't have any idea where they sit on that spectrum. They don't know if they're at 33, if they're at 40, if they're at 25. The Pomodoro method is focused on 25. It's 1 standard deviation away from that number. Again, reasons why people choose these lengths of time. I also know where I sit. And productivity debt starts to accumulate in a geometric pattern afterwards, which means it's small at first, but it grows very quickly. Have you ever noticed that you work a hard day, you get home, you sit down on the couch, and you're basically a vegetable for like an hour and a half? You might as well be drooling on yourself. Somebody should put a friggin' bib on you. People are like, me, that happens to me.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because you stayed focused for too long, too many times during the day. So you accumulated productivity debt. It's kind of like running out of willpower, but it's a different version of debt to you. And when you got home at the end of the day and you finally said, oh, I'm done, I can now, and what your body hears is not, I can now relax and spend quality time with my family, I can now finally drink a glass of water. What your body hears is, I can now repay my productivity debt.
Interesting.
And so it turns you off. You go into zoned out, as opposed to when you're driving a car or when you're in flow state and you're zoned in, you go into zoned out state. You and people have measured this. When you're sitting on the couch watching TV, your caloric burn is actually lower than when you're sleeping. You're paying back your productivity debt that you have accumulated throughout the day.
Well, that might explain a lot. So the second question I had, which is along the same line, is you said don't go on social media. Social media is a distraction tool.
Mhm.
And going back to habits, so what happens, and I see it especially with younger people, this distraction tool feeds the dopamine drip. It gives them all of the supposed positive reinforcement that they're looking for and need and want. So that becomes a very habit-driven thing. If I've got a free minute, I'm looking at Instagram. If I've got a free minute, I'm looking at Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever it may be, whatever your drug of choice may be. How is that?
So right, it is a drug.
So how is that habit productively broken and replaced with something that is better?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that?
Great question. Just like any drug, right? Just like any drug, the first thing you have to do is recognize that you have a problem. And listen, you're not alone. Facebook has 2.2 billion monthly users, 2.2 billion monthly users. More than 25% of the population of the world is on Facebook every month. Every month. You're not alone. It's okay to recognize you have a problem. These people are very, very smart social engineers that know how to push your buttons. You have to break off. So number one, recognize you have a problem. Number two, you're going to need to replace that problem. You're going to need to replace that drug with something else. My recommendation, Gordon, when you had people in the office and you had a moment in between tasks, did you pick up the phone or did you stick your head out the door?
Oh yeah, you would just chat with people. Real people.
Real people.
Imagine that.
Yes. My recommendation is when you pick up the phone, have it be to call somebody.
Oh, you mean when you pick up your cell phone rather than scrolling through social, make it a habit to call a friend, call a business associate, call a networking contact.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a great idea.
And rewire those dopamine receptors to have real connection instead of simulated connection through Facebook.
And that neatly brings us to our next topic about managing relationships.
Oh,
how do you
really
like
does,
that?
Doesn't it?
Actually segued the right way. So something that you talk about is connections, and I'm an avid networker, which has proven to be very valuable for my business. All of my business comes to me either from referrals from my networking sources and my networking partners, or through online sources. So, managing these relationships is critically important for me, and it's probably critically important for everybody that's listening to this. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? I love the idea of substituting a bad habit for a good habit. And I think a good habit is just picking up the phone. You don't always want to be asking somebody for something. If you just call and say, just was thinking of you, wanted to see how you're doing, what's going on? Whether that's a 20-second conversation or a 20-minute conversation, it creates positive impact.
Yeah, 100% agree. So connecting, and I'm the same way, by the way. My consulting business all comes through referral. One of the things that I started doing when I took over my flooring businesses is I started going out into the community and making actual real connection. I do spend some money on advertising. I'm bringing up advertising specifically in this respect because of this. But 60% of the money I spend on advertising is actually retargeting, which means when I go and make a connection and somebody goes and looks me up, the money that I'm spending is actually to pop back up in their feed over a period of time, so that if they were going to buy, they buy from me instead of somebody else, right? So it's about retargeting. Now, back to making connection. I focus, like you do, and I think this is a great way to do it. I focus on building community, on building a community that will support me. And the way to do that is by supporting them. And not just because it's going to make you money, people can tell the difference, but because you actually care about being connected, you care about making friends, you care about building a community, a family of people that care about you.
So great conversation so far. I wanted to just ask, we talked a whole bunch of different subjects here around, brain state, productivity, habits, great stuff. I really enjoy this kind of conversation. Is there anything that we're kind of missing that you'd like to get in there before we wrap up?
I think it's worth retouching on community, because I think the last 2 years, people have sort of forgotten that humanity is supposed to be in touch. And I mean that in the most simple and literal interpretation of the statement in touch. We need to shake hands. We need to hug. We need to kiss on cheeks or lips regularly. Part of what we're supposed to be doing is actually walking around in physical proximity with other people. And COVID has helped us forget that for mostly for the worse. And we need to be in touch. And the better that you can do that, and it'll show up in all aspects of your life. You're going to be less addicted to your phone. You're going to be more interested in spending time with people, but you're also going to get more business, because people buy from people who they know, like, and trust. Mm-hmm. And the like part of know, like, and trust is actually a really important part of that. The more time you spend building relationship, the more likely they are to buy from you. The more likely they are to call you when they have a moment, so that you get positively distracted, right? Because not all distractions are negative. Positive distractions are a thing too. Mm-hmm. And so focusing on being in touch, really, truly in touch physically, is a really valuable thing you can do.
Yeah, I would agree. In fact, a few months ago, when we were kind of getting back in touch with real people and having real networking meetings, I was really impressed by, in one of the groups that I belong to, one of the guys would walk into the conference room and everyone would stand up and give him a big old bear hug and slap him on the back. It was this big old love fest that, we didn't normally do 2 years ago, mm-hmm. but there was such an immediate need to feel like you were part of this group's, like you're really in touch. You're really part of this fraternity, so to speak. And it was very evident, and it still is today. Mm-hmm. Like, we'll have a social event later this week, and I'm sure that everybody will be like hugging and, backslapping and having a good time. And I think that that's just a signal of like how repressed or difficult the last couple of years have been without that face-to-face connection. So I think it's a point well taken.
Yeah. Well, my genuine hope is that experience you had continues, that the people in that room keep giving big old bear hugs forever, because I think that's a really positive and healthy way to be, except when you might catch COVID from them. But hopefully the benefits outweigh the fear at this point.
Yeah, I would agree. So, Lucas, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you being on the show. If people wanted to get in touch with you, continue this conversation, hire you as a coach or a consultant, how do they do that? How do they get in touch with you?
lucasroot.com, real simple. If you're a social media person, and hopefully this conversation has steered you away from that, but if you're a social media person, you can find me on Instagram. I'm pretty active there at Luke Root, LUCROOT, or just again, lucasroot.com.
Okay, fantastic. So again, Lucas, I appreciate you being on the show. Great information, great conversation, exchange of ideas and information. And until next time, my name is Gordon Coyle. I am the host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. If you have an interesting story that you'd like to share with me and my audience, please give me a call or drop me an email. My email will be in the show notes, as well as Lucas's contact info he just mentioned. So it's easily available. If you're driving, stay focused on the road. If you're running on the treadmill or out on the trail, enjoy yourself, and you can look at the show notes later. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Gordon.
That's it for this week's episode of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. In the meantime, find more interviews and resources at nybusinessleaders.com.